Hello everyone! So this is going to be a quick overview about how I do my line art. Obviously there are a lot of different ways to go about it. And this tutorial really just pertains to my workflow and how I go about doing it. And as a note, I'm doing this because a lot of people have told me that they like my line art, so hopefully this gives a little bit of insight into how to go about doing it if you want to maybe improve your line art, or maybe you're a painter who wants to try doing something with line art, or maybe you already do line art and you hate doing it. Because I know I personally like it and it doesn't take me too terribly long, though it is definitely about as long as my coloring and my shading combined right now. So, point one. Where do you even put the lines? Now, as a note, that is up to you and the style you're going for. I personally do lines around the edges of objects and where there are any sharp divides in planes. So if you think of a cube, typically when we draw it with a pencil, you would draw the edges of it around the outside edge, and whenever the planes change on it, you would draw a line in between those parts. So it's just like that, but it gets a little bit more complicated when you're drawing a human. I'll also note that stylistically, I have a few spots where I do a bit of hatching just for fun. So like the outside of the eyes and on the bridge of the nose, kind of like 𝐵𝐿𝐴 and JoJo, because those are series that have inspired me. And the question that plagues us all, how do I make line art smooth? This is really hard, and there are a few tricks you can do for this. So, number one, use long strokes and erase the edges to get points and adjust the thickness. It takes practice, but if you are more worried about just making sure your line art is smooth, instead of sitting there and hesitating and going back and forth, just go in and do it. Have your fingers on Control-Z. Just do it quick, smooth, big long motions. Now, as a note, if you struggle doing long strokes, you can zoom out. It will reduce the physical distance that your hand has to move on the drawing tablet, which I find can be really handy if I'm trying to do something like a cloak, or a trench coat, or maybe a character has their leg out or something. That's super helpful for me. Another trick you can do is to make sure to push your hand forward for straight lines and pull for curves. This is a principle from hand lettering that basically just takes advantage of what feels natural for your hand. And something else that I find helpful to make line art smooth is something that one of my bosses at one of my art jobs has taught me, is to just look ahead of where you want your line to go. It's the same principle as driving a car or a bicycle. You will go where you're looking. And a smaller subset of this trick for circles is to focus on the center of the circle you're drawing and try to maintain your distance from that center point. That way, rather than stressing about trying to make the line go in the right direction, you're just making sure your line is the same distance away from a point. As artists, we're a lot more used to measuring proportions when we draw from life. So, you just make sure that the proportion of how far away your line is from the center of your circle is the same all the way around, and you end up with a more round circle. Another note for this is you could also use a tool like Lazy Nezumi, or if you use a round brush, you can just put a dot and erase the middle away. That's a new favorite trick of mine. But not everyone draws digitally, and you don't always have those tools available. Another tip, and this will depend on the software you use. If you draw traditionally, this won't help, unfortunately. Use smoothing or a stabilizer. Most half-decent digital art programs have one of these by now, and if they don't, well, go get one that does. There are definitely free programs out there that do. Another mini tip for making your line art smooth: zoom out. If you work very zoomed in, all your wibbly motions will be translated onto your drawing. But if you zoom out, they'll be minimized, and you'll be less likely to pet the line, like I mentioned, with drawing long strokes. And finally, the last trick, which you absolutely need to do to make all of these others work, is practice. Some of these things for line art may help immediately, but you do need to practice them and just make them a habit so you remember to apply them. Get practice in, and don't shy away from doing line art, and you will master it eventually. Something that I get asked about a lot is, how do I decide what line weight to use? How thick should my line be? How thin should my line be? So first off, not all drawings need to use thick lines or heavily varying line weight. I like to because I feel it's easier and I like the look of it. If you don't think your drawing style needs line weight, then don't stress about applying all of these. You know, if you're shooting for a retro 90s style for anime, then don't do thick line art. If you like the more graphic style or you're trying to emulate JoJo or Hellsing like I do, then yeah, you'll need line weight. Now, just in case you're lost, line weight refers to how thick or thin the lines in your drawing are. Now, I choose where to make my lines thicker based on what feels natural to me. The center of a curve, the part of a form that has more mass, and which way the light is coming from are all important factors to me. But you can decide to use lines in completely different ways. For example, the artist 𝑊𝘩𝑒𝑟𝑒, who is one of my favorites, uses lines and black fills to tell us where the shadows are. Again, 𝑘𝑒, another favorite of mine, uses line art to inform us about the edges and the planes on the character, which you can see from the cross-hatching and especially in the later parts of JoJo, when his anatomy's gotten better. Now, even if you don't do thick lines, I really recommend using line weight to spice up your drawing and make it a little more interesting. Even if you only do a little bit, such as under the chin of a character, or as hair shadows, it's well worth it. Just going in and adding more emphasis to the parts of the drawing you want people to pay more attention to, by just having more variation in line weight and thereby creating contrast, you will just level up your drawing just an itty bitty bit, and it's so worth it. Now, for some miscellaneous tips about line art. First off, practice, practice, practice. The only way to get good at line art is to do it. Even if you practice traditionally while you're commuting or between classes or any other found time you have, it will help you build a steadier hand and feel for what you want your line art to look like. Now, I won't go into warm-ups here, and that's something I can do in another video if you're interested, but I definitely recommend doing line art warm-ups, especially if you haven't drawn for a few days. Another tip, if you find your line art seems too punchy, you can tone it down by coloring it. I usually do this quickly by selecting my darkest layer and filling a layer clip to my line art with it, then reducing the opacity to darken it more. You can also manually paint your line art the color you want with a clipped layer. And finally, this is kind of a tip relating to working with line art. If you find yourself struggling to get your flat color fills all the way to the edge of your line art with the paint bucket, there are a few tricks you can do for this. You can use the pencil tool in Photoshop, which makes it so you're basically doing really big pixel art and your fills will go to the edge of your line art naturally. And another trick you can do, these are the directions for Photoshop. I'm not sure what it would be in other software, but you can select the color that you're trying to make meet the line art, then modify your selection and expand it by 2 pixels. Then you can refill your selection with the appropriate color. And of course, be careful when you're working with similar colors. especially when they're close to your line art or sampling all layers. And that's all I have regarding line art. If you think I missed anything or you have any really amazing tips or resources on learning to do line art, feel free to leave them in the comments. If you want to request a tutorial, feel free to. I'm thinking about doing one about composition next, since I feel like I have at least a good understanding of it, and I don't see a lot of people talking about how important it is to think about composition when you're making a drawing. Hi there everybody, thanks for staying to the end of the video! Hopefully I can keep this short since now I have a VTuber here. Anyway, if you found the tutorial helpful, let me know. Maybe subscribe or check out my art on my other social medias. If your wallet's too heavy, I have a Patreon. I also have commissions. They may or may not be open. But yeah! Anyway, thank you so much to my patrons who have made this video possible and actually got to see this tutorial early, and they have a bit more of a say in any tutorials that I do make in the future. So, nonetheless, here's a big thank you to my pursuers, Big Print, Danny Jones, Holly King, and Nicholas Bartholomew, my Voidwalkers, Bonnie Schnabel, Lisa Bimbachi, Scarlett Brooks, and Sadie Hartman, and a huge thank you to our Mythic Sparks, Dead Reaper, and King X Link. Without you guys, it wouldn't be possible to make stuff like this, and it's really motivating to see that people like stuff that I make, and that I have the possibility of doing that as a job, and making real life money, and paying bills, and my student loans. Anyway, yeah. So, thank you so much for hanging out. You know all the stuff to do to please the algorithm. So, yeah. I will see you later. Bye!